everyone, welcome back to another art school vlog. We're not at art school today, we are at my house because today I'm actually going to spend the whole day and not going to art school prepping these panels. My dad and I went to Bunnings, which is like the Australian Home Depot, and we bought 2 marine ply panels. This is how I make like cheap, large, it's large, like look how big this one is. It doesn't even fit in the frame. Instead of buying like pre-made panels, this is how I make mine. They're great, they're archival. I'll put all the information down in the description if you want to make yours yourself. That's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to chow down my coffee in preparation to prepare.
Alright, voiceover me here. As you can see, these are the 3 panels that my dad and I made the night before, and we include what's called battens to the backs of the panels to reinforce it so it doesn't warp when I go and paint on it. But as you can see, the wood glue has started to spread outside of the battens, and so I just went in with a chisel and just shaved all of that back, which was actually pretty satisfying. But just be careful, these chisels are super sharp, and I did end up slicing my finger pretty badly on it. But once that was all done and cleaned up, I then went in to create a gesso mixture. Now, I explained really badly in the intro what I was actually doing today, and that was priming these panels, which means adding a few layers of gesso so the surface is archival to paint on, but very riskily thinning down this gesso with no drop cloth. So I made sure to then lay down a drop cloth so I don't get it absolutely everywhere and all over the sandstone that's outside. I then grabbed a medium grit sandpaper to sand the wood down just gently, creating a little bit of texture so that paint can stick to it properly. Then grabbing a clean brush and just dusting away all the dust that's been cultivated through the sanding process to make sure that my surface is as smooth as possible for this first layer. And now I'm going in with the first layer of gesso, and I personally like a really watered down gesso. So when I say my gesso mixture that I was mixing in that Tupperware container at the beginning, that was just me adding a lot of water to the gesso because the brand that I'm using is Matisse, and they notoriously have quite thick gesso, and for me, like I said before, I like a really smooth surface, and so I just watered it down a lot. And you can see here exactly how watered down it is once it starts drying, because you can still see the wood coming through because it's so watered down, it's not opaque. And now we move on to the next panel. I quickly do a sand and then do my first layer of gesso. Same amount of water to gesso ratio, my same mixture, and then I move on to the third one, sand it down again, and the process continues. I made sure to sand down the sides as well because, again, I want my surface to be really smooth. Also because there was some of that wood glue still seeping through. And then complete the first layer on the last panel. As I was doing the other 2 panels, the first panel has dried, and so I begin doing the second layer. And as you can see, I'm going in the opposite direction. The first layer I went up and down, and the second layer I do side to side. This makes sure that the weave of my brushes is going in opposite directions and not just hitting the same spots again and again. Also making sure I sand in between every single layer, again, because I really want a smooth surface. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the quite repetitive process that this was. Like I said, as I do the layer on the last one, the first one had dried, I'm just switching them out, trying to remember which direction I went in, being as consistent as possible, even though my arm was quite tired by the end. Pretty much just sanding and painting and sanding and painting. Took about 12 hours to get all 3 of these panels with 7 layers of gesso on it, sanded in between each layer. Yes, this part of the painting process is pretty tedious, but I'm really happy that I got it done for the day, let them dry overnight, and then took them into school the next day to begin painting. And because the size is much larger than any piece that I've done this year, I knew I needed to reorganize my studio to accommodate the sheer scale of panels. So I took out my easel because frankly it's not big enough to hold any of these panels, and so I decided instead that I'm going to use the wall and use a sort of French cleat style method of hanging up a painting, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on how I made it and what I actually mean by that. So I took down the previous painting that I just made. I'll link the video where I completed that up here, but I had these 2 screws already on the wall, and I just quickly hung up the painting, and boy oh boy was I very intimidated but very excited because it is so large. And because of the sheer scale of it, I actually decided that I'm going to get 2 painting palette cart things that were supplied at school. One of them I'm going to use for oil painting, and the other one I'm going to be using for acrylic painting, and I'm kind of going to sandwich myself between these 2 palettes. Instead of using one palette for oil and acrylic and potentially accidentally mixing the 2, which you can't do, I'm going to have one for water-based and one for oil. And here's where we get to the plan of how I'm going to adjust the height of the painting while I'm painting on it, just like an easel is able to do. I'm going to have different levels of screws so that I'm able to sit the painting higher at some points and then lower at other points. So if I need to paint the top of the painting, instead of having to stand on a chair or something, I'm going to lower the painting down so I can stand and work at the top of the painting. This is basically called like French cleats, but I'm not using cleats, I'm using screws. It's a pretty common method when you're working on such a large scale, especially when your easel is not able to hold the weight of these panels, because these panels are so heavy. And you can see here me, one, struggling, and two, now being able to raise the panel as high as it would possibly go up to the studio walls, just to make the process of painting a lot easier. And yes, I know I've already sanded these panels excessively, but I just wanted to give it one more quick sanding just to make sure it's as smooth as it can be. And finally, we are on to some proper painting. 6 minutes in and we're only just cracking open some color. So I grabbed a cool yellow, and you guys probably know at this point I'm going to start off with a lime green base. I've been doing this a lot for the past 3 paintings, I think, and I haven't stopped loving it yet. So I mixed up a lot of paint because this panel is going to soak up a lot of it. So creating a generous pile of some cool yellow and phthalo green, and I went back and forth adjusting how much yellow to put in and how much green to put in until I got roughly the color that I was looking for, and now we finally begin painting. I was very excited to get started on this acrylic base because I just grab a big old brush and I make big swoops and big gestures, and I can be really expressive and really relaxed about the whole thing. If you know my style, it's quite refined and detailed, and so I really go all out on these acrylic bases just because it's in contrast to my typical painting style. I'm able just to relax a little bit, making sure to paint the edges as well, because I personally love the lime green edges poking through. It reflects onto the wall and I think creates a really cool glow around it. And I got my first taster on how navigating this painting is going to be. I had to get up on the chair to get the edges of this panel, and don't worry, with all the extra paint that I didn't use, I created a base on a smaller panel to then paint on in the future sometime. I used another one of these panels to create a little bit of a study for the larger one, although they're not the exact same ratio. Side note here, my teacher came in and said that she prefers actually the vertical orientation, even though I had planned for a horizontal composition and added the screws to accommodate that. I then had to adjust the screws to be able to paint this vertically, but I can always change the orientation if I decided that I like the horizontal more. But we started sketching out the composition, and I haven't even told you what I'm painting on this panel, but it is 2 interacting figures, and I love playing with poses that initially seem very comforting but actually are quite aggressive, and create a pose that mimics when people like squeeze your cheeks in like a cute way but want it to be very forceful. And so I'm trying to, throughout this painting, emphasize the force that she's putting on the other girl's cheek. And in the horizontal composition, it's a little bit more evident, that forcefulness, because I rotated the reference image so it looks like the girl that's pinching the other girl's cheeks is lifting her up. I also put in a wall behind her so that it looks like that she's pinning her up against a wall and sort of defying gravity by making her levitate with her strength by just pinching her cheeks, you know, so it's like contrasted of the cutesy grandma pinching her cheeks, but it's actually very aggressive and strong. But now with the vertical composition, it looks like that the top figure is swooping in on the picture plane and is actually the one defying gravity, where the other one is laying on a bed or something like that. So I guess the narrative's kind of changed, but like I said, I can always change the orientation. And I had to go in with some of my neon acrylic pink. I love this color and I think it needed some warmth and another color other than green. Also keyed in some of the darker areas of the painting, like the background, with my paint roller to create some texture as well. I love my paint roller. I don't even know if it's a paint roller. I think it's like a printmaking roller, like the roller that you use for ink. But anyway, I love using this technique where I grab a really wet brush and I just scrape back the acrylic paint, because the paint that I've just laid down should be still wet enough to remove. And so the areas that I want to glow a lot more or just remove the paint, you probably saw me do this a lot during the sketching process, removing any proportions that I didn't like. It also subsequently creates a lot of drips, which I will always invite. And here's the first time I am adding opaque paint on the hand there, because I knew I wanted that hand to glow with green paint as it touches the skin of the other girl. I'm now grabbing a brush loaded up with thin green paint, the same green paint that I used for the underpainting, and I'm creating a lot of splatters and drips all throughout the piece, specifically because I wanted the background to not look flat and have a lot of layers. And anytime someone would come up to this painting, they would comment on the dots in the background, because I think it adds a magical fantasy effect, which I will talk about later in this video. You can also see throughout this video that my outfits keep changing, and that's because this is over the span of a few weeks. And now that the acrylic base has dried, we are now going in with oils, and you can see this is my reference image here. These are my sisters, and I wanted her skin tone to not be realistic, and so I created a mock-up of a sort of mermaid-like skin tone that I wanted to recreate. And then I just went for it and started rendering, and I love this part of my process. I mean, I love all the parts of my process, and I would hope that you do as well if you are an artist, because I think that's really important to love all the stages, even the ugly stages, because yikes. But I really do love the rendering. I can just zone in and go for that realistic style that I always love to do. And started to get the first of 2 oil bases down on both the figures, so I went ahead and did that. Now off camera I did a lot of work. I added a lot of oil paint to basically everywhere, and I didn't film it because honestly I was struggling a lot, and picking up the camera was the last thing on my mind because I was just panicking. I did not have a plan going into this painting, and I think it really shows. So from here on out, this painting in my opinion goes on a very steep decline. So let's just have a flashback to when I was originally hopeful. Okay, so I'm going to tone down this section here with a little bit of paint to communicate the form of the arm more, because this whole section here with the neck and the head and the arm has given me such a headache, because in the photo reference it looks completely natural, but if you don't then translate that with paint perfectly, like the anatomy isn't perfect, it's gonna look weird and it's gonna look off. And that's what's been happening right now, so hopefully when I tone this back it'll look a little bit better, and then I can then move on to another section of the painting. But I need to get this sorted first so it doesn't put me off any longer. So like I very dramatically said, I need to tone this section of the arm back and then bring out the shoulder using the correct values, because right now these values are very off because I've been using a lot of transparent washes, and here's the first time where I'm actually using somewhat opaque paint to bring out the shoulder, which is why the anatomy is looking so off, because I'm not using the right values. And it took me many weeks to get to the stage to actually start using some opaque paint in the limbs, because I did want to keep it all translucent, but I can't have translucent paint and then bad anatomy, like that's just gonna really frustrate me. So I just folded and started to use opaque paint. And this fight between translucency and opacity is really my struggle throughout this entire piece, because as you can see, I'm doing a second layer on the face, and the faces are the only thing about this painting that are actually opaque, and all of a sudden there's a transition of opacity to translucency in the neck and shoulder area. Like, it just doesn't make sense. I didn't want to have the limbs be fully opaque like the faces, because 1, I thought that it would overpower way too much, and 2, I wanted to keep the materiality of the paint showing through. And I do genuinely like the effect that it gives, but with the faces it just doesn't pair very well, and I need to find a balance between the two. I even changed the orientation of the panel back to horizontal to awaken my eyes to any of the glaring mistakes that I can't see because I'm used to the original orientation. And boy oh boy did it just enhance every single insecurity that I had about this painting. But the issues that I have, they were either so large, like the composition, and there were so many of them that I started to ponder the idea of, would it be worth me continuing this painting? But I was still mucking around with opacity and rendering. I did stop that for a second and try to go back to the original roots, which was this acrylic base and all the different textures that I was able to create. So using the palette scraper, I scraped the wet paint of the hands in a certain direction to add this sort of forcefulness and motion onto the portrait. But even with that, I still had to step back at the end of the day, and I was at square one. So let's sign off this art school vlog with me doing the outro.
Hi everyone, it is nearing the end of the video, and you might be expecting me to say something along the lines of, this is where I got up to for this video, thinking I'm gonna finish this in the next video. But that's actually not the case, because I am calling it quits for this painting. For now at least. I might at some point come back to it, but for right now, my time has to be spent only on producing work that is going to be in the upcoming graduation show, which I explained before, but I'll explain it again. Basically, a graduation show, pretty self-explanatory. Every graduating student is going to submit their work in a massive art show at the end of the year where thousands of people come. It's a big event, and I'm just making work, preparing to submit into that show. And I thought that I would have a lot more work to submit, and this one was going to be the big one where it's like, if anyone's gonna look at my work, I hope they look at this one. If anyone's gonna choose my work, I hope it's gonna be this one. But it hasn't really worked out. And instead of trying to make it work, I'm just gonna put it to the side. I'm not gonna touch it, and if I have time, I'll come back to it. But for right now, I'm gonna put it aside. I'm sorry that I've kind of like shown the video anyway, even though it's not really gonna have much of a satisfying ending. I thought about not even submitting the video, but I thought it was important to share the successes just as much as I shared the failures, because this is, I guess, a reality, and I don't want to pretend that every work I make is going to be success. So that being said, specifically what I don't like about this painting is individually I look at this painting, there's some stuff that I like. Close up I look at it and I go, yeah, I kind of like it. When I'm painting it, I'm like, yeah, this could actually work, and I step back and I'm like, yeah, no. So overall, I don't like the composition. What I thought was the only thing that was saving this painting could actually be the thing that's making me feel a bit cringe about it is the green arm. I was really set on the green arm. I did like a study on it, but I think that could actually be the thing that's making me not like this work, because it feels very fantasy. It feels very like she's giving her magical powers or something to the other person, which is fine. Like I do like that work, but it's not the work that I want to create personally. I haven't rendered this face here, and I was saying to my friend yesterday, I was like, oh, I'm just gonna touch up her face, I'm gonna get rid of the green arm, and she went, no, Saskia, put it aside, and when you're in a better headspace, you're gonna make better changes than you are now. And I totally agree with that, and so I'm gonna put this aside. Even though it kind of hurts to do so because I've spent, you know, basically a month on this painting. So that's a little update. Sorry, I've kind of taken you on this journey and it hasn't worked out, but I hope this demonstrates that not every painting that you're going to make is going to get consecutively better than the previous one. I felt like, I don't know, I was always in the mindset that that was always going to be the case, and when it doesn't work out like this one, it's so devastating because you feel like you've taken such a leap backwards. But I'm trying not to have that mindset because I actually have taken some steps forward. I learned a lot of techniques with this one. The scale is something that I'm not used to, so that was fun exploring that. So I have taken some steps forward, and that's sort of what I'm trying to say to myself. But that's pretty much it for this video. Let me know your thoughts on this painting because I genuinely want to know if it's as bad as I imagine. Like I don't even want to, as soon as I stop recording, I'm going to take this down and turn it around because I just can't look at it anymore. Let me know if you've experienced anything like this or you found this really disappointing or really helpful. Let me know. I don't know. Next video, we are going to be starting a new painting once again. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.